So just to kick things off then, I'd like to welcome everybody to today's forum. This has been organised as part of a project that we're running at the IES, which is called Turning the Tide, Systems Thinking for a Sustainable Ocean. In the chat, we'll share some links about the project if you'd like to find out a bit more and stay in the loop for our future activities as part of this. So I would like to introduce you to today's event, which is on ocean literacy, how to change humanity's relationship with the ocean. We are delighted to be joined by 3 incredible speakers today. Each of them are going to be presenting in turn for around 20 minutes. And then after all of today's presentations, there'll be a chance for questions from yourselves. So please do submit these in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation. If there's a particular speaker that you'd like to direct your questions to, then please do include their names in your question, or you can just keep it general. And then I will then ask these on your behalf later on. So I would, as well as the Q&A, I'd encourage you to definitely make full use of the chat during the session as well. Feel free to post any thoughts, comments you've got, or questions for anyone else in the audience. All right, so I will now introduce each of today's speakers. So first we'll be hearing from Dr. Emma McKinley. She's a research fellow at Cardiff University. Her research focuses on understanding the complex relationships between society and the sea, and considers how this insight can be used to support effective ocean governance. Next up, we'll hear from Nicola Gudrich, who's the head of ocean advocacy and engagement at the Ocean Conservation Trust. Nicola is a conservation biologist with over 16 years of experience in environmental education, engagement, and science communication all around the marine environment. And last but not least, we'll hear from Xavi Gudrich, who's an environmental scientist, artist, entrepreneur, and also Latin language teacher. In 2020, he founded the Plover Rovers, and as part of this ran a grassroots project that's called Talking the Coast, focused on bringing together the marine science community with coastal artists and citizens. And this is something that he'll be talking about today. All right, just lastly to mention, Emma unfortunately can't stick around until the end of the session. So if you do have questions for her, then please do get them in early, and she'll be able to do her best to answer them in chat. And just a reminder, this is your chance to ask any questions that you have to some leading experts in the field, so please don't hold back. All right, thanks again for joining, and I'd now love to hand you over to Emma.
Okay, great. Hopefully you can see my screen. Joe, I can see you. So if you can, yeah, you're nodding. Fabulous. Thank you so much for that introduction, Joe. Always terrifying when somebody refers to you as a leading expert and to say, don't hold back. That's always a great start. Please be nice to us. It's lovely to join you today. As Joe mentioned, I can't stick around for the whole session, so please do feel free to ask me any questions in the chat and Q&A. I am Emma McKinley. As Joe said, I'm a senior research fellow at Cardiff University, but I'm also the founder and chair of the Marine Social Science Network. And as Joe said, all of my research is really centered on understanding the very complicated and complex relationships that we as people have with our marine and coastal environments, and crucially how we can now use that evidence and that data and that understanding to develop better policies and think across the whole system for our ocean and sustainable ocean futures. So I've been asked to set a bit of the context for ocean literacy and talk about how that concept has changed and moved and evolved over the last 20 years or so. And I guess I wanted to start by, oh, there we go, by really getting us to think about that connection, that relationship that we have with our ocean and coastal systems. So all of us on this call, we probably won't have to think very hard about understanding how much of a role the ocean has in our everyday lives. We know that the ocean has acted as a connector across time and space for generations, providing trade and transport links, sites of historical and cultural importance, sites for industry, of a range of sectors, including obviously the fishing industry, tourism, recreation, and they are cultural spaces as well. They are hugely important. But that relationship between people and ocean and coast has perhaps not always been a focal point of research and not always been understood in terms of its complexity and its diversity. Recent years, however, have really started to see much more of a policy interest in understanding the people bit of our ocean and coastal spaces. And Nathan Bennett does a really good job of explaining how our oceans are peopled spaces in a paper he wrote a few years ago. And I just wanted to highlight some of those examples as part of the context of where we are in terms of ocean literacy in 2023 and going forward. So we have things like the Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, many of us on this call who I would imagine are all very marine and coastal and ocean people. We fit quite nicely within SDG 14, Life Below Water. But of course, the work we do fits into all sorts of other Sustainable Development Goals, things like poverty alleviation, food security, sustainable energy resources, climate action, sustainable communities, all of the research that we're doing, particularly those of us that work within social science research and practice, really can see how our work can be applied across the Sustainable Development Goals. We have the UN Ocean Decade, but also the Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, which again really is centering that relationship between people and their restored environments. And on an EU scale, we have Mission Starfish, which positions restoring our ocean and waters as one of the key goals of the EU Mission Board for Healthy Ocean, Coast, Seas and Inland Waters. And alongside that regeneration and that restoration of our marine and coastal environments, we also see things like addressing and filling the knowledge and emotional gap that they identified as being an issue for European communities and their relationships with their watery spaces. And also reimagining and revamping our existing governance structures, pushing against the status quo and thinking about how we can do things differently, which I think is a really fantastic aspiration. And of course, closer to home here in the UK, we have our own policies like the 25-year environment plan, and Wales has the Future Generations Act, the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act, which really positions well-being across social, cultural, environmental and economic well-being as key drivers for every decision we make. And in Scotland, we have the Blue Economy vision, which again is putting people, ocean and place at the centre of the decisions they're making around blue economy, and ocean literacy is really feeding into that. And of course, just in the last few days, we've had the High Seas Treaties approved and agreed, which is an absolutely incredible achievement and just fantastic to see that that has now happened. But I guess it's just important to note that while that is offshore, that is in our areas beyond national jurisdiction, that is still about people. That is still about how we as society are managing, using and making decisions about our marine and coastal spaces. So all of the work we're doing around marine and coastal engagement and sustainable ocean futures really has to have how people use and engage with those spaces at the centre of that. And ocean literacy has been really positioned as part of the UN Ocean Decade's mechanism for change around that. So most of you will be very familiar, I'm sure, with the Ocean Decade, which was launched in January 2021. And of course, not without its challenges and its issues within the Ocean Decade, but what it does do is it is really centering and creating momentum around the ocean that we haven't perhaps seen before. We have 10 years, 7.5 now, and 10 challenges to address. And for me, one of the key ones is this idea of transforming society's relationship with the ocean, recognizing that that is not necessarily needed everywhere. But I think that aspiration of really connecting people and connecting society to the ocean is a really fantastic goal of the Ocean Decade, and one that we have a lot of potential to act on. So ocean literacy has been identified as a key way of achieving that transformation. Ocean literacy is not a new concept. Ocean literacy has been around since the early 2000s and was originated by incredible marine educators in the United States who identified a real lack of ocean education within the national curriculum. And they devised 7 key principles that you can see on the screen in the blue column beside the walrus, that they identified as being key principles that they felt that should underpin marine awareness raising, marine education, ocean education, to develop ocean literate people. At its very simplest, ocean literacy can be defined as an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean. And I think for me, what the key thing to take away from that definition is that could mean so many different things. That can be applied in so many different ways, not just to our individual relationships, but how we make decisions about the ocean, how our institutions relate to and have an influence on the ocean. So I think there's been a real evolution of ocean literacy in that way in recent years. So going back to the beginning, ocean literacy was really based on these 7 key principles, which have a number of other components underneath them, and very grounded in an ocean education and an ocean knowledge perspective. And the idea was that by raising awareness of these 7 principles through incredible marine education initiatives and programs that have been happening across the world in the last 25 years, we would develop and foster a greater sense of ocean literacy, and that ocean literate people would be able to understand those 7 key principles and the fundamental concepts that underpin them. So have knowledge about the ocean, that they would be able to communicate about the ocean in a meaningful way to other people, to their peers. So communication being a core aspect of ocean literacy. And then that they would be able to make informed decisions and take responsible behaviors on an individual basis. So behavior being that third kind of initial key component of ocean literacy. So we have knowledge, communication, and behavior. And as I said, ocean literacy is not new. Over the last 20 years, there have been a range of different initiatives, conferences, the development of the National Marine Education Association in the US, but also the European Marine Science Educators Association, which Nick will tell you much more about when she speaks later. And we've seen ocean literacy conferences. IOC UNESCO have developed policy toolkits, education toolkits, and it has become a much more, I want to say much more operationalizable. That's not a great word, but it's something that there's much more weight and effort and momentum behind ocean literacy than we perhaps saw at the beginning, which is brilliant. In terms of the research around ocean literacy, it has really changed in recent years. And in 2019, there was a special issue of Frontiers of Marine Science, which drew upon those original 3 components and that original definition of ocean literacy and started to expand it and think about, how can we include the various aspects of these complicated relationships that people have with the ocean within the ocean literacy framework and model. So the boxes on the left-hand side of your screens, the blue boxes, you'll see that we have those core components that I mentioned at the beginning. So as components of having a fundamental understanding of the ocean, so knowledge, being able to make responsible decisions, behaviors, and that communication aspect. So again, really a knowledge-driven model. Brennan et al. Provided a slightly more comprehensive model where they suggested that there were 6 dimensions of ocean literacy that should be included. So they have those original 3, but they also said that we need to think about people's attitudes, their perceptions towards the ocean and the issues facing the ocean. We needed to understand the awareness people had around the threats, the concerns, the pressures facing the ocean. And then they also included a 6th dimension of activism. So what kind of behaviors, what kind of activism activities were people able to engage in, or were they engaging in rather? Well, not able to, but were people engaging in? So these were the most comprehensive models of ocean literacy in 2019, 2020. And in response, well, not in response to that, but at the same time, the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition and others, we were doing some work on it here in the UK as well. But this word cloud from COLC really, for me, captures how that concept of ocean literacy has evolved in recent years. And what we're seeing is things like ocean relationships, ocean knowledge exchange, ocean livelihoods, ocean stories. So when people are asked what ocean literacy means to them, it's not necessarily ocean knowledge, although of course that is a key part of it. It's more about that relationship, that connection to the ocean. So really going back to that original definition of an understanding of the ocean's influence on you and your influence on the ocean, and the fact that that can be more than knowing what species live in your part of the ocean. And of course, that is very important, but there are other factors that might feed into people's ocean literacy. So myself and Daryl Burden, who I think is on the call, were commissioned by DEFRA and the Ocean Conservation Trust to do some work to look at the existing models of ocean literacy and where there might be gaps and where there might be opportunities to push that evolution of the concept a bit further. We published a paper just before Christmas where we explore that model, and we've actually suggested expanding the original 6 dimensions of ocean literacy, which I'll talk through a little bit in just a second, but also suggesting 4 additional dimensions that should be included when we're talking about ocean literacy. And this framework was further developed through work I've been doing with Nicola and through the Diverse Marine Values Project. So, for example, we suggested that rather than the knowledge dimension being just about understanding the ecological and oceanographic processes of the ocean, that knowledge should also mean having knowledge about maritime career opportunities, having knowledge about how people can engage with ocean issues, whether that's through governance processes, whether it's through engaging with coastal partnerships, whether it's knowledge of solutions. So we thought the knowledge component needed to be expanded. Another example where we suggested an expansion of the definition was around communication, where previously that had been defined as communication between peers and between individuals. And we suggested not only do we need to understand people's capacity to communicate, but also what platforms are people using? How are institutions communicating to people? What's working, what's resonating with different audiences? How do different audiences communicate with each other? And then, for example, activism. We suggested that activism we needed to understand not only what activism people were undertaking, but what the barriers to that activism might be, who was able to engage in what, whose activism is valued and respected. So a real range of different expansions to the definitions. And then also these 4 additional components that we thought needed to be included as well. So the first one that we really thought was very important was emotions, so emotional connection, whether that be positive, negative, neutral to an ocean or coastal space, and how that might then influence people's perceptions or their behaviours. And that emotional response might not be to the environment, it might be to how that environment is being managed. That you really understand the emotional responses of people and how that feeds into their ocean literacy and how that transforms relationships is really crucial. How people access and experience the ocean and recognizing the barriers and challenges that there might be in terms of equitable access and experience opportunities as being part of ocean literacy, and how that might then influence an individual's level of ocean literacy. We also included a new dimension of adaptive capacity, and this was very much related to aspects around communities and individuals' capacity to respond to change, whether that be in response to our changing climate and the climate emergency, but it could also be changing coastal economies, changing societal structures within communities, changing education programs, a real range of things. So adaptive capacity was included as our 3rd additional dimension. And then finally, we also wanted to include trust and transparency. How much people trust the information that they are being given, how much they trust the institutions making decisions. All of that could act as a leverage point or as a blocker to how ocean literate people are willing to become or willing to be engaged with the ocean. If people don't trust an institution, they may not trust the information that that institution are giving them, and that might then in turn influence levels of ocean literacy. So a complicated and complex set of dimensions to try and assess and measure. And we use this to develop an ocean literacy survey that I know Nick is going to talk about, so I'm not going to focus on this for very long. Just really to mention that this was a survey and is an ongoing piece of work led by DEFRA, but with support from the Ocean Conservation Trust, NRW and Marine Scotland. It's been run twice so far, with the recent reports for 2022 available from November of last year. And we tried as best as we could to cover each of the dimensions that I've just talked you through. Some better than others, and there's definitely room to continue adapting and changing that survey as we continue to develop it and use it over the remainder of the ocean decade. And hopes are that we will run it again in 2024 across all 4 of the devolved administrations and make sure we have data from across all 4 countries, and we can continue to monitor how things are changing throughout the ocean decade. Some very key quick results from the English survey from last year that I just thought you'd be interested in. The first one being that 84% of people felt that the marine environment is important to them. So we have a hook. We know that people care about the marine environment, and that's perhaps not surprising given how coastal our 4 countries are. Thinking about that knowledge dimension, there's really varied knowledge of the types of terms that we in the marine and ocean sphere use on a very regular basis. So things like climate change and sustainable fishing, they're very well known, and that's perhaps not surprising given the mainstream media focus and coverage of those topics in recent years. But other terms that are used very regularly within a policy context, things like ocean literacy itself, the ocean decade itself, are not as well known. And from a policy and audience perspective, that was really useful for DEFRA and NRW to know, so they can then tailor their language and adjust things as needed for the communities that they'll be working with. I always find this really interesting that 38% of our respondents, and remember it was over 12,000 people, so nearly 40% of people, and that figure is very similar for England, Scotland and Wales, felt that their lifestyle had no impact on the marine environment, positively or negatively. And for me, that really highlights that disconnect for a number of people with the everyday role of the ocean in our lives. And so something that while we have that hook, that 84%, we also have a lot of people that we need to work with to kind of increase that connection and that awareness. There was a really high level of recognition of the benefits of blue space. And again, another hook, 84% of people felt that the ocean and coastal spaces were positive for their mental health, but also over 80% for their physical health as well. And we see multiple things like this, where 50% of people had visited a marine environment in the last 12 months, and that had been up considerably from 2021. And we ran the surveys quite close together because of 2021 being quite affected by COVID still. So we wanted to check that. And crucially, over a third of people had travelled more than 50 miles to get to the coast. So there's a real draw of these environments. So we've got stuff that we can work on and that we can build on. And I know that Scott's going to talk about some of the work that he's been doing to do that in his talk as well. So that's the national kind of state of affairs at the moment. And as I said, work is definitely ongoing around that. I wanted to highlight some work that we're doing through the Diverse Marine Values Project to look at ocean literacy on a much more regional scale, local scale, really. So through this project, we're trying to look at how we can incorporate and integrate different types of values. So moving away from the historical dependence on ecological and economic values, recognizing their importance, but also thinking about how we can use social and cultural values and things that come under that ocean literacy framework to feed into our decision making in the UK. We've made things very complicated for ourselves. We've chosen 3 case studies that are very complex. So we have Portsmouth on the south coast, where we're looking at issues around coastal defence, coastal management, heritage connections, and some water quality issues. We have Shetland, where a lot of the focus is on transition to their blue economy transition and rural economy work. And then I really tried to make things very complicated by including Chepstow as our 3rd test site for the project. Now, Chepstow is not somewhere that is traditionally coastal. It is on the River Wye. It is away from anywhere that you would, if you're standing in Chepstow, you don't necessarily feel like you are somewhere coastal. But it is incredibly tidal. It is a very significant maritime history. So it is a place where that maritime connection is perhaps lost. And given that we're talking about diverse marine values, we wanted to think about who gets to be a coastal community, whose voices and values get to be heard in these conversations. So we're trying to challenge that idea of who is coastal and what communities get to be involved in the ocean literacy work that we're doing. Definitely a work in progress, and we've got a year and a half left of the project, but if you want to know more about this work, then please feel free to get in touch with me after the presentation. Excuse me. I wanted to then just really quickly draw your attention to some work that's happening on a global scale. So if anybody is interested in ocean literacy and ocean literacy research, there is the Ocean Literacy Research Community that's been driven by myself, and Nick's involved as well, by Diz Glithero from the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition with support from IOC UNESCO. We've run a series of workshops over the last couple of years, with the first one run in July of 2021. And what we've been trying to work together to do is to co-develop an ocean literacy research program for the ocean decade, to think about what are our gaps in understanding around ocean literacy and its potential for impact and for policy pathways as well. As a community, we've identified 4 key priority areas, although those are evolving and changing with time, and with a cross-cutting theme of justice, equality, diversity, and inclusivity. But our 4 thematic areas are measuring ocean literacy, so actually measuring the impact of our ocean literacy initiatives. How do we do that effectively? How do we measure how successful they're being? The link between ocean literacy and climate change and climate action. The link between ocean literacy and the sustainable blue economy agenda and how those 2 agendas may or may not align. And the role of ocean literacy as a policy tool, as a mechanism for change. These topics were discussed through the Ocean Literacy Dialogue series that was held at Impact 5 in February of this year. And we ran a series of 7 sessions, which were all recorded. The links are all being made available on the Marine Social Science Network website, as well as IOC UNESCO's website and the Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition. So again, if anybody's interested, I can provide those links and make sure they're available to you afterwards. And if you're interested in signing up and engaging more with the ocean literacy community, again, please do let me know and we can make sure that happens. I'm conscious I'm running over time, so I'm going to skip that big slide and just come to my concluding thoughts. So the first thing really is just to highlight that ocean literacy is much, much more than communication and education. They are key parts of the work that we are doing within the ocean literacy community, but it is more than that. And we need to ensure that when we're talking about ocean literacy, we bring in that whole spectrum of work that's happening. There are at least 10 dimensions, and I am by no means saying that we have managed to explore those relationships and that complexity in a way that is exhaustive. And I fully expect that model to change and evolve more over the coming years. So, but that's a starting point. I'd really love us to challenge who is currently considered in the work we do around ocean literacy. You know, we talk about the ocean being for all. So how do we make sure that all of those people, particularly when we're somewhere like the UK, which is so coastal, so island based, how do we make sure all of those voices, those values, those people are included when we're talking about ocean literacy research? So challenge who gets to be involved in ocean literacy. Of course, I want to signpost you towards those reports for England, Scotland and Wales. There is one forthcoming for Northern Ireland. Nick's going to talk about the work from that in a bit more detail, I think. But really, they're really valuable starting points for understanding how people are feeling, what the perceptions are towards a range of ocean issues across the UK. We can use those to help understand our communities in our areas. But I think there's still some work to think about how we then embed all of this into our decision making, how we develop effective pathways for bringing in these people bits into our marine and coastal research. So I also just want to do a very quick plug for the Marine Social Science Network. If some of you may already be signed up, but if you're not, we run a monthly newsletter, we have a book club, we run webinars. If you're interested in marine social science research and practice, including the broadest kind of definition of that, arts, creative approaches, again, please drop me an email and I can make sure I sign you up to the newsletter so you can keep up to date with all of that as well. Joe, I'm very sorry for going a couple of minutes over, but with that, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me, and I will stop now. Thank you. And I just remembered I meant to be handing over to Nicola now. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and let Nick speak.
Thanks, Emma. Oh, great to hear from Emma, all that lovely stuff. And hopefully, yeah, some of the things that I'm going to talk about now kind of link to the research and that side of things, and how we as the OCT bring that to life a little bit. So I will do this. Here we go. Is that all right? Can we see that okay? Yeah, lovely, thanks. So Ocean Conservation Trust, that's who I work for. I'll introduce them a little bit more in a second. But yeah, that's me. We talked earlier about how embarrassing it is to have all these things said about yourself at the beginning, so I won't go into that. But yeah, work for the OCT, president of European Marine Science Educators Association, and some other stuff. But basically, yeah, I love ocean literacy. I love trying to find new ways to help people to connect with the ocean, with the ultimate goal of looking after the ocean. And that's really what we do as the OCT. So we've been around for about 25 years, but we haven't really ever, oh, it's disappeared. Oh, I've got it. Hang on, come back. There we go. Ah, oh no, I'm going to do that again. There we go. We haven't really ever kind of published our strategy very much. So this is our lovely new strategy, which you can find on the OCT website. And it really is our kind of mark in the sand over the next 5 years about what we're here to do. So our goal is a thriving ocean, and the 5 areas in which we're trying to work are connecting people with the ocean, protecting habitats, influencing locally, nationally, and internationally, evolving sustainably, and really looking at how we can kind of bring the connection between the ocean and climate to a broader audience. So that's what we're doing over the 5 years within our strategy. And to do that, we have our 3 key programs, which are these. So if you haven't heard of the OCT, you might have heard of the National Marine Aquarium. So we run the National Marine Aquarium down here in Plymouth. That's where I am now. And it's a huge part of what we do in terms of connecting as many people as possible with the ocean. We're really lucky to be a charity that's kind of all about people and run an aquarium, because it means that we get to see thousands and thousands of people through our doors every year, who some of whom are coming to us because they love fish and they love the ocean and they want to learn more, but lots and lots of them are just coming because it's a day out, they're here on holiday. So actually it's a great location to kind of reach people who might not normally be ocean people. The other kind of big program that we have is our Blue Meadows program, which is all about seagrass restoration and protection. So we've got various projects along the southwest coast. And the great thing for me about that is, because I am all about people, we really couple the restoration and protection work with the local community. So we have volunteers, we have a community engagement manager that brings what we're doing in the sea onto the shore and into the town cities where the seagrass is. And then finally, the final program is Think Ocean, and that's kind of really our ocean literacy program. So that's what I'm going to kind of focus on as we move forward through the presentation. So what do we do for ocean literacy? What is Think Ocean? And what's some of the theory behind what we do and how we do it? So why do we need Think Ocean? Why do we focus on ocean literacy? I mean, Emma gave a really great explanation of the history of ocean literacy and where it's going in the future. And it links inextricably with what we're trying to do as the OCT, as in trying to do our bit towards a healthy, thriving ocean. But what we recognise as the OCT, and I'm sure many of you sitting here feel the same, all of the issues facing the ocean, I say all, most of the issues facing the ocean are down purely to human behaviour. Things that we're doing that aren't sustainable, that aren't thinking about the future in a sustainable way. So actually what we're trying to do is influence human behaviour. So how do we do that? Who does it? Well, we have our ocean advocacy and engagement team, and we've got a very long explanation of what that's all about. But in a nutshell, what we try to do is be a voice for the ocean at all sorts of different levels of society. So we started up and continue to run the Ocean Literacy Working Group with DEFRA, and then right down to having a grassroots aquarium with people coming through the door every day. So yeah, being a voice for the ocean at different levels, and then connecting people to the ocean in ways that are meaningful for them. So that's what our team does. And then what we're advocating for when we say, what are the stories that we're telling people? What are we trying to help our visitors and people that we work with digitally and in other locations? We talk to people about habitat restoration, government action, improving access to the ocean, enhancing ocean education, sustainable living, and supporting global action. So they're kind of the areas that we focus on, because we feel that if we can kind of do those things, we're pushing back up towards that healthy, thriving ocean vision. Put a couple of hashtags there as well, which I'll talk about a little bit more later on. But hell doesn't sell, and ocean optimism. We really try to talk to people about the ocean in a positive way. There is a whole audience of people that are completely engaged with the ocean, with the issues that are facing it, and they know what needs to be done. But actually, from our point of view as the OCT, because we meet so many members of the public all the time, we do know that, as Emma said, people do want to help, but we've got to be really careful to not put them off. You know, not everybody is coming from the same background as me, a huge marine, you know, advocate. It's my life, it's what I do, I know a lot about it. But, you know, there is an understanding by the team here that many people, you know, we're not all the same. And actually talking to people immediately about the issues and problems can be really off-putting and actually switch people off. So we really try to be optimistic and use this kind of hell doesn't sell approach until we've got them sort of sucked in to how awesome the ocean is. So that's a bit of the background. So yeah, we want a healthy, thriving ocean. We know it's not thriving because of human behaviour. So what can we do? How can we use ocean literacy? How can we help people to gain those connections to the ocean so that they might want to do their bit to look after it? So we sort of use a few different things. So marine identity theory, which I'll talk about in just a second, ocean literacy, the 10 dimensions that Emma was talking about has been absolutely brilliant for us in terms of our practice. You know, we started 25 years ago, definitely on the knowledge side of things, where we're like, let's just give people loads of knowledge. We want to tell people about fish and then they'll love them and they'll want to look after them. Actually, people do love fish, but does it make them change their behaviour knowing about fish? Potentially not. So the 10 dimensions, vital. And then nature connectedness, and then our own conservation pathway. So I'll just quickly talk about those things now. So I'm not going to do this justice. So marine identity theory, there's a few people around the world working on it, but in the UK, the kind of leading expert, I would say, is a lady called Pam Buchan, Dr. Pam Buchan. She's brilliant, and she's done a PhD looking into, you know, marine citizenship and what is it that makes some people more likely to take action for the ocean and others perhaps not. So this is her theory on a page. So I've boiled her PhD down into one page. I'm sorry, Pam, if you're watching. So her thoughts are positive marine experiences, having some kind of attachment to a marine location, being dependent on that location, livelihood, but also for mental and physical well-being. Those are the kind of, that's the sort of atmosphere, the landscape, the marinescape, that builds somebody's personal marine identity. And then she's found that if people have these things about them, they are more likely to take action, positive action. And those actions could be things as sort of shown in the boxes below: lifestyle choices, consumer choices, recreational impact that they do just to sort of boost their sense of their self-esteem, their self-efficacy, their personal feeling responsibility. They're not doing it to show off to other people that they do these things. It's just intrinsically within them to want to do it. And then there's the sort of the social side of things as well, the public actions, choice of profession, volunteering, petitions, voting and protesting. So we, as the OCT, have really taken on board these thoughts, and we are embedding that into our program. So we're trying to provide, which I'll talk about shortly, different types of activities for different people who are at different levels of this kind of this marine, having a marine identity, so that if somebody's already feeling like they're connected to the ocean, how can we help them to do that more? And if they're kind of starting at the beginning of that journey, what can we do that's not going to put them off? So marine identity theory, really important. Obviously ocean literacy, as Emma said, understanding the importance of the ocean to humankind, talking about the ocean in a meaningful way, and then making informed and responsible decisions regarding the ocean. So this is really key to what we're doing. Just another kind of way of showing Emma's brilliant circular dimension diagram, just past, present, future of the different dimensions. We're trying to build into our programming different activities that support these different dimensions. And then nature connectedness. So Home to Us All is a brilliant report done by Nature for All. Nature for All is a kind of a global movement. That's the map there of all the different organisations that signed up to Nature for All. We're there, OCT in the UK. And this report really kind of showed the things listed here, that actually positive direct experiences in nature with somebody as a child that the child looks up to really kind of support them as adults to have that connection, as Pam was sort of talking about, place dependency, place attachment, and then they're more likely to take action. People of all ages who participate in nature-based activities tend to be happier and healthier than those who don't. Social experience in nature foster connectedness to each other and to nature. People who develop a sense of place are more likely to want to protect it. Knowledge is important, but not enough on its own. Meaningful positive experience in nature is a powerful way of developing connection with or love of nature, and then connectedness to nature is a strong predictor of positive conservation behaviour. So our activities, you know, if you looked at what we did as the OCT 5 or 6 years ago, it was all inside the aquarium. We'd come in here and we'll show you fish and do some cool workshops and have a great time. But our programme now is massively based on the shoreline of Plymouth Sound. So we do boat trips and snorkeling and shoreline strolls and walks, just really not forgetting about the aquarium. The aquarium is very important because for some people, actually, it's safer and easier to walk around an aquarium than it is to go outside on a bumpy, rocky shore in bad weather. Actually, that kind of unnatural environment in a way can be better for some people. But yeah, we really have changed our programming to make sure that we are connecting people to the physical ocean itself as well. So all of that kind of added together, getting there to the point of all of this, is our ocean pathway, our conservation pathway. So marine identity theory, ocean literacy, nature connectedness, all of that has informed this very simple diagram, which is actually key. It's our aim, it's what we're doing every day, it's how we're working with thousands of people every year, and how we ensure that we provide a range of activities that kind of hit these 3 areas. So that, yeah, this is our pathway. So in a dream scenario, somebody would come along and have some kind of experience or participatory activity with the OCT, with the community, on the shoreline, in the aquarium, doing something hands-on, and just building up that emotional connection if they haven't got one already. As Emma was saying, emotion's really, really important. So within those experiences, we're not really trying to pass on any knowledge, we're just trying to create a fun, engaging time with people. Next step, discovering and learning, kind of with that experience, adding some knowledge into there that's actually meaningful and connected to them. So we do a lot of work with communities, and we really find out what it is about that community that we can support them with. So we're not going in, hello, we're here to tell you loads of stuff. Okay, what do you want to know? What would be useful for you to understand about your relationship with the ocean? And then stick those 2 things together. And then the final thing is connecting and acting. So then providing really simple ways that people can change their habits, write to their local council, take part in something, do something that seems small, but actually all small things added together are big things, to sort of make their impact towards a healthy ocean. And then it kind of keeps going round and round. So somebody could come and do one thing, they built the connection, they know us, they could come back and do something else. So that's what we're doing. So this is Pam's paper here, Citizens of the Sea. And I don't know if you want to take a screenshot of that or something. So you can have a read about that, because it is really key to what we're doing. That pathway really links with that. So helping people experience before trying to get any knowledge into them. Oh, and I think I've just put some lovely photographs of nice things that we do. Here we go, lovely. Inspiring through ocean optimism and discovering and learning together. As I mentioned, there we are. Oh, lots of nice stuff. Cool, okay. So does it work? a few bits of our impact report for this year. So through the aquarium, we managed to speak with 70% of our visitors last year. So that's over 220,000 people. And we use different survey techniques to collect data from them about what they think, what they feel, what they do after a visit to the aquarium. So on average, at a score out of 5, 4.53 on average, felt that people had improved or had their knowledge. So from a visit, their knowledge and skills and attitudes and enjoyment and behaviour was sort of scored 5 or 4.53 out of 5. 53% of people learned something new. Obviously, we have just sort of said a lot about, it's not about knowledge, but it is great to know that people are learning. And then slightly odd thing here, but 27.47% of people's attitudes about the ocean were positively influenced. And then an additional 43.45 were also positively influenced, but they just wrote yes. So we've got to be quite careful to not sort of over-egg that. Some further results here from, so those results were based on the 222,000 people. This 11,500 people or so are people that we work with more than once, participating in the activities that I was talking about, rock pooling, boating, blah, blah, blah. So again, these average scores out of 5 in terms of their knowledge and understanding, 4.39, skills, attitudes and values, enjoyment and behaviour and progression after working with us. So good things happen when people come to the OCT. But broadly, how can we find out more about people to make sure that our programmes continue to be relevant? As Emma said, we were working with all of these other amazing organisations, the government, to produce the ocean literacy reports. And then we've used this information to do a couple of things. So Emma actually went through some of the key results, and I think the one that really kind of was most, I wouldn't say most important, but very interesting to us was the 70% of people wanting to make a change for the ocean. So I think what we find is that in society, when you talk to people about issues facing the ocean, the big one is plastic pollution. But there's a lot of people out there, well, 70% of people who they want to do more. They want to understand what are the other things that I can possibly do. I've done the plastics thing. What else? How else does my lifestyle impact the ocean? What can I do to look after it? So this survey has been really, really important for us to know about that. So what we've done from it is it's a fun little thing. It's called our Think Ocean Challenge. So if people take the Think Ocean Challenge, there are 7 or 8 really simple questions that are actually linked to the big questions within the survey, the UK survey. And what happens is once they've answered the questions is they get an email back which puts them into one of these shoals, head, heart, hands or new starter. And each shoal has its own tips and advice depending on what shoal they are. So somebody who kind of thinks about the ocean with their head would be somebody that perhaps is more someone like me, maybe like more of a kind of a sciencey person. A heart person perhaps is somebody that lives near the ocean and just loves going there for their well-being. And a hands person might be somebody who enjoys the ocean for recreation, perhaps a sports person or a surfer. That's very broadly defined there, but that's how we did it. New starter is obviously somebody that answered those questions perhaps without much knowledge. So we would put them in the new starter category. And the tips and hints that they would get via email help them to kind of build their connection. So yeah, this learning that we can do, this way of understanding how people think about the ocean means that we can give these really targeted bits of advice to people about how they can help. So moving on from just sort of recycling, how does thinking about whether you eat meat or not protect the ocean? How you vote protect the ocean? Giving people that information and the kind of the pathway there about how they can do things to help is definitely something that we think was missing. And then finally, this is a very full slide. Another thing that we've done is, again, working with PAN, is for those really quite far down that kind of ocean literate journey. They're ocean literate, they're a marine citizen, they've done the Think Ocean Challenge, they're connected to the ocean. What more can I do? How can I do even more than these things? We created a motion, a bit like the climate emergency declarations that councils all around and governments all around the world have declared over the course of the last few years. In Plymouth, Pam was a city councillor, and we worked together to create a 7-point motion that Plymouth City Council adopted in November 21, which basically talks about embedding the ocean into their decision making. And then since then, there's lots of dots there on the map. Lots of other places have taken on their own motion. Emma's been working in Monmouthshire, and theirs is an ocean and rivers motion. So they brought in the river as well. So on the OCT website, there's lots of advice for councillors about how they could write their motion for their local area. So basically, this is a way for us then as the OCT to talk to people. Okay, you've done all of these actions, you're ocean engaged. The next thing you can do is find out if your council has a motion, and then ask them what they're doing. Are they looking after the ocean? Have they been thinking about it in their decision making? Have they embedded it into schools in that location? And if not, why not? And if they're obviously somewhere that doesn't have one, then there's resources for them to try to pressurise or helpfully, nicely ask their council to declare a motion. So then we've got different, as the OCT, just those different ways that people can engage. So right from the basics of getting in the ocean up to, okay, ask your council if they have an ocean, if they can declare a motion, and what they're doing if they have got one. Whew. So I think just to wrap up, and really as Emma was saying right at the beginning, there's lots happening around the world now in terms of ocean literacy. Really interested in IES and the systems thinking, you know, at the sustainability goals, the ocean really impacts all of them, and having ocean literate people out there, or marine citizens out there, is only a good thing. So from our point of view as the OCT, it's moving forward with ocean literacy, taking those dimensions and getting that more emotional basis within the population and their connection with the ocean, so that we can help people to know that they can take action to protect it. And on that note, it's probably a very good time, I'm sure I've gone over, I've got no idea what the time is, to go on to Scott, because he's been doing exactly that on the ground, working with people. So I'm going to stop talking and pass to Scott.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, yeah, so thanks for this really interesting presentation, and indeed it links in with a lot of the things that I have been working on with the Talking the Coast project that we ran in 2021. So first, shortly to introduce myself, I am an environmental scientist, and I am also an artist. So this whole idea of how do we bring the emotions into science, and how do we use art to trigger emotions in people and then lead them through this emotional activation to more activism is really, really close to my heart. I have a background in teaching as well, so outreach work is in my nature. I am at the moment very much focusing on my band, which is all about bringing the positive message out to the people, and out to people who maybe normally would not be engaging with the topic. So we are a hard rock band, and we try to get people who normally maybe wouldn't really be sort of the target group for scientific outreach to connect to nature on a more emotional level. And if anyone, of course, wants to check out the work that we do, I've put the link to our website on this slide. So the Plover rovers came into being just when COVID hit, which was interesting because the basic idea of this project was that I wanted to bring together the marine scientific community, especially early career scientists and students, with coastal communities. So it was really an idea to address this disconnect that a lot of people in coastal communities have with their coastal environment and also with marine science, and the disconnect that scientists might have to these coastal communities. So it was a two-way thing. And then COVID hit and we basically had to do everything online for the first year. So the personal connection kind of had to be put back a bit. But then in 2021, we actually did go out there on the coastal path and brought people and communities together physically as well. So our aims with this project were to build bridges between science and society, to create knowledge and increase ocean literacy in the old-fashioned way of bringing in knowledge to people who might be lacking it, but then also network for sustained engagement and empower communities to face the sea. And this goes beyond sort of knowledge creation, celebrating local heritage and highlighting local issues, and then also putting them into a larger context. And the basic idea was that we worked with partners on the more scientific side. This is just one example. For example, the University of Hull, we had a whole bunch of volunteers, most of them early career scientists and students who facilitated these outreach events that we organized. We then had our partners go out and offer free events. All the events were free of charge. It was one of the things that was really important to us because we didn't want there to be any barriers for people to attend the events. And then bring their knowledge into the community, therefore increasing ocean literacy, activating people, and then sort of strengthen their own work in the sense that people would be more aware of the work that they were doing and would be engaging more with the ocean and ocean science. So that was the basic idea behind the concept. I'm not going to say anything about this because this was already covered, how it fit into the UN Decade of Ocean Science, but it fit in there, of course, very nicely. How we did this was that we basically said, we kind of condensed our approach down to a 4-level approach to ocean literacy. One, the traditional science communication approach, where what was important to us there was that we really brought the scientists and the people on one level. So it wasn't supposed to be top down with yet another lecture, but we worked a lot with very small groups and with a very direct interaction between the talkers and the recipients of the talk. So it was more of a dialogue than a lecture. Then we had art and emotion, where we worked with coastal artists to connect to people through the arts, different arts, visual arts, but also poetry and music. Activism, where we tried to give people a direct pathway to local activism. So like Nick was saying, in an ideal world, they would go to one of our events and we would present them with knowledge and emotions, and also with a possibility to get locally active, for example, with beach cleans or other things, so that they straight away could act upon this newfound connection. And then the local heritage, connecting people to a maritime heritage, which they may or may not be aware of at that point in time. And we did this a lot through a storytelling approach. And I'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a second. Actually, right now, so this is starting with the cultural heritage. So what we wanted to do there was we wanted to increase the community sense of belonging and involvement with the sea. by highlighting their maritime cultural heritage. In some cases, we worked in especially sort of the southwest, where there's still a very strong sort of small fishing port culture. People are, of course, extremely aware of that heritage. In other places where the heritage is more sort of a past industrial connection to the sea, for example, this heritage might not be very, very alive in people's hearts and heads, or it might actually be quite negative. We had a lot of people in the Northeast, for example, who come from sort of the North Sea mining background, for whom the sea was basically a monster that from time to time came in and killed people in the mines. So it was interesting to look at that, how you could maybe turn a negative relationship traditionally with the sea also into a positive relationship and inspire positive stewardship. So sort of reimagining your own connection to the sea as well as discovering it. It might be a negative connection. It might be a big whaling background, a big whaling port connection, or it might be like a mining thing. And it might actually need some work to turn this into a positive relationship with the sea. The natural heritage aspect of it, again, about inspiring stewardship by connecting people to their natural heritage. There, COVID really worked in our favor because everyone was going out in front of their doorstep and was discovering nature in front of their doorstep. So a lot of people that we met during our events were talking about like, oh, I had never actually noticed all these great things I can discover right here because I'd always gone abroad on holidays. So that was a really good effect, and I would hope that this will, based on also relate to giving people a bit of a broader horizon. For example, talking about plastic pollution, we did some work around rivers and source to sea stuff as well. So this would, I think someone was asking in the chat, how do you connect to people who are further away from the coast? Now, our project very much centered around the coast path, so we were very close to the sea, but we had some of our volunteers working further inland as well, drawing the bigger picture of how everything is interconnected and really everything connects back to the oceans. And again, by increasing knowledge and the level of local activism, empowering people to actually make a positive impact on their local marine environment. And through, yes, hell doesn't sell, exactly, ocean positivity, through positive messaging and then partnering with local initiatives, we try to give people that sense that they can be part of the solution, that they're not just part of the problem, because that's of course something where as humans we get all this news about all the negative impacts that we're having on the natural environment, and it's really important that we feel like that we can be also a positive puzzle piece here, not only the destructive force, but also a force for good. And talking about a force for good, because we were centered around the coast path and about making the coast accessible to people, and because a lot of people were accessing the coast during COVID, we also had a focus on best practices. So we wanted to raise awareness around recreational disturbances. Our mascot animal, the ringed plover, is a ground breeding bird that's very vulnerable to recreational disturbances for dog walkers and people using the beaches. So we again and again promoted mindful access to our coasts. We had a code of conduct for all our walks, and we tried to again help people enjoy their coastal environment, but without having a negative impact on it. And sometimes this can be a very fine line to walk because you want to get people out there, but you also have to basically shut off some areas where they just can't go without causing harm. So that was a discussion we had over and over again with people wanting to access the coast and not being able to. Our volunteers were mostly students and early career professionals. Actually, one of our volunteers was now a part of the working group at IUCN, who was part of bringing that High Seas Treaty through. So that was great. Another one of our volunteers is very active now with river programs and is actually organizing her own outreach event this September. So it was partly the idea was to inspire these young science professionals, ocean science professionals, to really shape our charity and then also go out and do their own thing, inspired by what they did with us. So that worked really well, especially, was really happy to see that some of our we had 4 long distance walkers who really walked almost the entirety of the English coast path and did outreach work on the way with local communities. And that was something that they described as a life-changing experience, and that's something that would influence them going forward. So I think, interestingly, part of the work we did was kind of not only outreach by the scientific community to the citizens, but it was also about inspiring the scientific community itself, kind of like going back into giving that energy to go back into different outreach work that they might be doing in the future. We also had volunteers from non-marine backgrounds as well, like art or journalism, psychology, education. So we had a great mixture there of everyone wanting to get involved. And like the numbers that Emma had earlier showed, there is so much willingness to get engaged with the ocean. People were very aware of that. This was an important issue and they wanted to get involved in it. Our walker talkers were all members of the scientific community who presented relevant research. Here we had one of the few really bad weather events where our walker talker was talking about Sabellaria reefs, and these were all local people who had no idea that they had Sabellaria reefs at their beach, and they were all really amazed to discover that. So what you can see here is the group is quite small, and that's because we were still very reined in by COVID as far as group sizes went. And that was actually a takeaway realization from this project, that we did a lot of evaluation afterwards, and people loved the small groups. Participants loved the small groups, and also the presenters loved the small groups. And everyone agreed that the level of getting through to people, having these actual dialogues, and then sending people away with the feeling that they could now go out and have a meaningful relationship with the ocean was very, very high, much higher maybe than if you'd had more numbers. So this comes to, how do we rate success with this kind of outreach work? We can't only be looking at how many people we reach, but what kind of a qualitative impact on their lives do we have? And small groups were really, really great for that. And then, yes, we had our long distance walker bloggers who were walking the coast path and blogging about it while they did it. And we have all their blogs up on an interactive map, which I will show in a second. And this gave people access to the coast who could not physically access the coast. So this would be people who for some reason can't reach it, but they can join in with our bloggers walking the entirety of the coast and sharing in their emotions and observations. So that was a way of making this access even broader, broadening it out beyond the coastal communities that we were targeting. And we had our artists who were all in some way inspired by the coast and the sea. Sometimes they paired up with scientists for their events. Here we have an artist and a young geologist, for example. Or sometimes we just had an artist talking about how the sea inspired them and their work. We had also 2 dedicated stories that were written for the Plover Rovers. We had a choir piece performed and some music by my own band around the project. So we just explored different ways of opening these emotional floodgates for people through the power of art. And interestingly, the events that involved artists were also the events where the audience was the most mixed. So very often when we did an analysis of our audiences, we saw that it was sort of the usual suspects of kind of like middle class white academics who would come to the more scientifically based talks, whereas at the art events we had much more mixture of class and age and also ethnical background, interestingly. So that was just interesting to see that the arts obviously were able to cross over some class and educational boundaries there. The project was very cheap to run. This was our entire project budget, just under £3,000, which we raised from 2 fundraisers. We didn't have any other funding, also partly due to COVID. A lot of the funds for charities at that time just went to projects that centered around COVID help. But it was great because it means it's a great blueprint to export to also countries with less funds potentially. All of our events were very small scale and could be run with on really a skeleton crew in a way. We reached about until the end of the project, so these numbers are now higher because all the stuff is still up on YouTube and everything, but by the end of 2021 we had reached around 850 people through our YouTube channel, through our webinars, and around 450 with our in-person events. And since like I said, the groups had to be quite small because of COVID, so we couldn't really go higher than that. This was the number of blog reads through our website, and this was the people who accessed, the number of people who accessed our interactive map that we set up, where they could read the blogs, for example, and see information about the events that we had staged. This is our interactive map. So this shows the coastal walking routes. It features the blogs written by our long distance walkers and our events, and also information about most coastal towns in England. So people who cannot access the coast can basically take a trip around the entirety of the English coastline through this map, which is still up there and accessible to people. Here you can see again just a number of the events that we ran. Also, like Nicola was saying, very much taking people onto the coast. But accessibility is an issue. So I think the fact that we did have a lot of virtual content as well was good there, because not everyone is able to go rock pooling. Not everyone is able to actually physically access the coast. So it was important to us that there was an alternative for people who couldn't do that. And this is just a couple of outtakes from the feedback runs we did afterwards. So this is just that to show that these type of events were really successful from a point of view also of the talkers. They were all happy with how the events went, and that felt that there was a good rapport between them and the attendees. I'm going to skip through this a bit. But one thing that was quite interesting was that the only thing that was really not a given was that we had this mixture of people from different walks of life. It was often quite homogeneous, except for during the art events, which were much more mixed. So for me, that would be something to take away also into the future. If we want to reach a broader audience, the use of different forms of engagement, including art, I think is really, really good. One of the things also that was mentioned, which I still wanted to address, was this importance of getting the children engaged. Now, our focus was mainly on adults. We didn't really have a lot of things that were specifically aimed at children. However, what we found was that when we did have events that engaged children, the adults tended to be more emotionally engaged as well. So this is something that I notice in my current work as well, where I'm doing community outreach around climate change, and that as soon as you get the children engaged, this will open up an emotional connection to the parents. And I think this is something that we can use in our messaging and also going forward, that basically it's great to engage the children because they grow up with it and they develop this connection, this emotional connection to their natural environment. But it's also a way to reach parents who maybe are so caught up in their everyday life that it's a bit difficult for them to access their emotions towards their natural environment, but when they see their children sing a song about how we are part of it all and how we are the web of life, or if they talk to their child and their child says, oh, I'm so worried about all the plastic that's going into the ocean, or whatever, this is something that will trigger a parent's emotion more than anything that we could do when we just kind of lecture at that parent. So yeah, that's just an observation that I still wanted to share. Yeah, and that was it in a nutshell. I think I actually managed to stay within 20 minutes. Conscious we're already running over. So if you have any questions, I'll stay here for the question and answer. And yeah, thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Scott, and Nicola as well, for both of your presentations. Yeah, so Emma has dropped off now, but yeah, there were a few questions that have already been posed in the Q&A that were for Emma, and she's got to answer. There are a few more that have come through as well. So yeah, I thought I'll just kick things off with one of them. So yeah, maybe we'll direct this one to you, Nicola. So, well, both of you actually can take this one in turn. So, having worked in this field for many years, what is the biggest challenge that you've witnessed that gives you hope? Change that you've witnessed that gives you hope for the future?
Oh, these questions always make me bring a tear to my eye. This right now, we're talking about ocean literacy. You know, in a forum like this with natural scientists, maybe there are some social scientists with us here. I don't know. It's this right now. Just the idea that all of these issues facing the ocean can't be solved, but there's more likelihood to solve them by bringing people in on the conversation. And the emotional link that people have with the ocean being taken seriously is great. And I think actually, I won't ramble on for too much about this, but I was very lucky to end up at Impact 5 in Canada a few weeks ago, and the focus there on people and their connection with marine protected areas, the number of early career professionals there, really confident, really passionate. That gave me loads of hope and invigoration. And then also the indigenous communities that were there as well, and being around the table with Western traditional, Western scientists, but indigenous people as well, and bringing those two types of knowledge and understanding together is really, really a great thing to see. So yeah, still lots of hope, but it's the fact that we're able to talk about ocean literacy in these kind of forums is brilliant.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's great to see how much more focus there is now on this emotional connection, and I think that's really. I'm hoping that this is what is going to be the step change, also in just because we need to be quick now. And things need to move forward, and what science couldn't achieve for decades and decades with knowledge transfer. I hope that my hope is that this emotional connection thing is going to be the key, because I mean something has to be the key, and yes, that is what is giving me hope, and to just see how interested people are, how much positivity there is. If you do reach out into communities, you hardly ever get a negative comment. I mean, everyone is kind of embracing this idea of that this is a positive thing to do, to increase ocean literacy, to do this kind of outreach work. So that's something that gives me a lot of hope when these positive interactions with people.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, both. And I guess, yeah, the kind of key message that really I think a lot of people would take away from this is, yeah, as you're saying, like that emotional connection really to the ocean. And I wonder whether, thinking about it from the perspective of like yourselves, really, the people out there kind of doing that work and pushing the message of ocean literacy, whether there's whether that sort of takes an emotional toll on the people involved in it, and whether there's sort of any, basically what your thoughts would be on that, and whether there's advice for sort of dealing with that, or making sure that people involved are taking steps to take care of themselves whilst doing this work.
That is
is that something?
It's a very important point. I think a lot of the volunteers I talked to, and these were young people, master students, partly bachelor students, and they already felt the toll of just having all this knowledge about how bad things are. Can be very devastating. And I think to keep that positive energy going, it's important to allow the grief as well. I think there needs to be, you can't deny the negativity and the grief. You need to be able to let it out, and you need to be able to have support for that. So I think emotional support is so. I mean, I talked to one researcher, marine biologist, who just was in the unlucky position that their research was focused around a lot of very bad numbers, sort of going towards extinction of the species they were looking at, and they said they felt like a mortician rather than a biologist, because it was all always about about death and extinction, and very, very negative. And they felt that they always had to put on a brave face, basically, and then people were asking them to be positive, and they just couldn't do that. And I think it's just really important to have space and support for the grieving as well. Like, it's okay to sometimes cry. It's okay to be emotional in that way. But then it's important to also have ways of kind of refocusing on the positive things that are going on, and on sort of positives within your work as well as the negatives within your work. It's all about finding the balance, but I think we just mustn't put ourselves under that pressure of always having to be positive, because that's, in the end, that's not going to be sustainable.
I think for it's definitely about finding people that are like you. Scott and I have been at various things there's lots of people like us out there, and actually I say that, but I'm all the things that I think I'm always questioning myself. It's important to find people like you. Actually, for you, it might not be important for people to find people like. For me, I need to be with people that are like me. That I've got a terrible sense of humour, but I really like to do things with humour and fun, and taking the mickey out of people, obviously in a nice way, not bullying. But I'm a people person, and I want to be with people, and that really sort of keeps me going. My team here, I'm sitting in the aquarium right now in my office, obviously, but I've got a whole team of people out there at the weekend ahead. We've got a really busy weekend coming. We've got over 6,000 people coming through the doors for a National Marine Park celebration. We're on the shores of Plymouth Sound National Marine Park, and they're going to be speaking to lots of people throughout that day that are going to have all sorts of different ways that they connect with the ocean. And sometimes my team will say, "Oh, I don't really feel like I'm having an impact. I'm just talking to people about fish." And it's like, yeah, but remember that spark, that little bit of enjoyment, that fun that you give them, it could spiral, and it might only spiral in one person, but that person could be the person that goes on and saves the ocean. So I really like that kind of the diagram of the little tiny little domino that you hit, and then it hits a slightly bigger one and a slightly bigger one and a slightly bigger one, and in the end, boom, you've made a real impact. So I really try to help them. You might feel like you're just talking to an individual, but you don't know who that individual is and how you'll make them feel and what they might go on to do. So I feel like I might have gone off track a little bit on that with that answer, but I completely agree with Scott as well. Like, sometimes you do just have to sit there with your people or by yourself, if you're a more by yourself person, just feel a bit sad.
Yeah.
But you just got to keep going.
Yeah,
and I don't know, something in me just keeps me going. I don't know. I just keep going.
Yeah, but find your tribe, definitely. It's all about finding your tribe and getting the support you need. And I mean, arts can help. For me, it's the creative work that keeps me going, the creative outlet I have through my music, which is all very it's powerful, but it's positive powerful. It's not sort of like doom. It's not doom metal or anything. It brings brightness, and it's designed to make people feel better. And I would hope that it does not only do that for me, but also for other people who listen to it. But yeah, you need to find your tribe. I would agree.
Oh, great, thanks so much. Yeah, all like really useful insights, and definitely like a lot of this does come back to kind of community and connecting back to people. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of the session. So if anyone has any more questions they'd like to ask Scott or Nicola, then do post them into the Q&A now.
Two questions in the Q&A, I think.
Yes.
One is, which is the most difficult audience? That's an interesting one. I think.
Yeah, so I'll read up full just for the people watching that. So, which is the most difficult audience to engage with ocean literacy programs? And do you have any advice for working with them? So yeah, for either of yourselves.
I would say there's different different levels of difficult. I find that working with youths can be challenging if they're not pre-selected. So if it's not youths who would already come through their own volition to whatever you're offering, but if you say go into a school and just have to work with random teenagers who are very concerned about like being cool and they have all their teenage things going on, I find that it's I wouldn't say my advice is get really many tattoos, but I find the tattoos really help. If you come in there and just kind of don't seem like a boring scientist or like a boring teacher type, it's all about it comes down to that it's the personal connection. I think all audiences who initially might seem a bit difficult, if you manage to establish a connection with them, and this is all about kind of knowing your audience and allowing yourself a couple of minutes at least to open your channels and see what your audience is like. I think a lot of the problems arise when someone goes into a situation and just does their thing and doesn't connect to the audience, because it's just like, oh yeah, I have my program and I'm going to do this and this is what it is, and then either it's going to stick or not. But I think as soon as you sort of do active listening techniques and really open up towards your audience, you can pretty much build up a relationship with any audience. So that would be my advice. Really know your audience. Be open towards your audience.
I completely agree. I think positive mental attitude, just try not to think of anyone being difficult, and what is it that I can do to meet them where they are, what's going on in their life, what, they don't want, like Scott said, they don't want a scientist turning, hey, hello, I've come to talk to you about the ocean and climate. Who cares about that, obviously I do care about that, but but then also perhaps not having that preconceived thing that they wouldn't care about that. Actually, maybe they've got so much else going on they genuinely do care, but they just haven't got the time to think about that because they're not us, they're not like us. So actually one thing we did with youth is we did a week-long program called Meet the Marine Park, and that was working with young people living in Plymouth but over the other side of the A38, so far from the sea. And the first thing we did with them is just took them mini golf, and the mini golf is up on the Hoe so that you can see the sea, and we just built up a relationship by playing mini golf and just having a laugh and going for ice cream. And then they realized, I didn't even know this was in my city, and we just sat on the beach with them and looked at the sea and just didn't really do anything, just sort of chilled out and had a chat. And then they realized that space was for them, and they could get the bus there and go and buy an ice cream themselves and just sit and look at the sea and enjoy it. But I do think business it'd be really great to crack ocean literacy for some of the big corporates. How can we, you know, there's something around that we haven't quite done. They want to throw money at stuff, but it's more than that. Stop. We want your money, but you know, we also want you to feel like engaging people with the ocean is conservation. So that's a work in progress.
Oh, great, thank you so much. Okay, so yeah, I'll be wrapping up soon. There's just one comment that came through in the chat that I'd just quickly like to pose. I think this one's more for you, Nicola. So someone's asked about how to get involved with the Ocean Literacy with All programme. Yeah, how to go about that.
Send me an email. So yeah, Ocean Literacy with All, there's some sort of key partners are there, but each partner is running a different component, and there's different tasks within the components. So there's all sorts, there's research, there's more surveys, there's working with businesses actually, there's evaluation of ocean literacy tools and techniques. So there's lots that you could potentially get involved within. I'll put my email in. Oh, hang on, chat, where are we? Yeah, there we go. I'll put my email in there and you can send me an email. I'm doing that now.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Nicola. Perfect. Okay, so just going to wrap up the session then. So just to mention then, this forum has been recorded, so we'll be making it available on our website and the IES YouTube channel within the next week. So please do subscribe if you are now watching on the YouTube channel and stay up to date with our content. That is it for us today. So I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everybody that has logged on and joined in. We've had some great questions come through, and good to see some interaction in the chat as well. So a really good session. Thank you so much to our speakers, to Scott, Nicola and Emma as well, who's had to jet off already. I hope that everybody has gained a lot from this session and is keen to join us for our future events. So I mentioned at the start, this event's part of our year-long project, which is called Turning the Tide. We've got a mailing list for this project, so do sign up to that if you're not already on it. And just to let you know that we've got our next event as part of the project is going to be on the 30th of March, and it will be focusing on different coastal management approaches. So if you're keen to join that one, then it's up on our website. So yeah, do have a look and register for that. So yeah, that's it for today. Thanks again.
Thank you.